I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and I was visiting the house of the glass artist Michael Glancy, who was the husband of my mother's friend Robin. And we were walking between their house and his glass studio, and he pointed out a tree to me and my brother, and there was a glass bead. In my memory, it was about the size of a fist, blue-green in color, and the shape of a donut, and he had nailed it to the tree a few years back, and the tree was beginning to grow around it, and it looked to me as if the tree was either melting around the glass, or perhaps the glass was melting into the tree. And he turned to my brother and me and said, in some number of years down the road, somebody's going to come with a chainsaw and cut this tree down, and they're either going to be delighted to find this bead or really upset that it ruined their saw. So now, decades later, when I'm walking in the city and I see part of a tree engulfing part of a fence, or perhaps starting to wrap around a building, or vines and fences, or grass growing in the cracks into the pavement, or plants growing in the gutter, I'm enchanted by that tenacity of nature, and also the relationship that we have as humans to that natural environment. And as my interest in woodworking and art and making things has grown, I'm also interested more and more about what is inside of that tree, and how they've grown around those immovable objects, and how they've changed because of it, and how they've healed in the face of that adversity. Insofar as there is a distinction between human civilization and nature, the relationship between us is inherently an abusive one. We as humans know we need nature, and we're willing to say it out loud, say it to each other, and say it to nature. But we take advantage, and when a storm or a tree or a river acts outside of our desired behavior, the bounds that we've set, we try to retaliate. And the true persistence of nature, though, is in the interpretation of timescales. We work on minutes and days and weeks, perhaps years and decades, but trees will work on many decades, perhaps centuries. Rivers will work on centuries to millenniums. And that difference in our interpretation of time leads to a type of resilience that we can't comprehend fully. Consider water, for instance. Water can carve a canyon through a desert with a trickle and reshape the coastline, or even soften our sharpest shards of glass. And when provoked, water in the form of a storm can knock down the levees that we've put there to control it. There's no more stark example of our human relationship with nature than when walking the city streets. We put rivers in tubes and pipe them underneath our cities. We constantly change the plants in our concrete planters for ones that are currently in bloom. And there's entire sections of our home goods stores devoted to controlling plants to conform to our human idea of beauty. We cut small holes in our sidewalks and plant trees in them, trees just barely out of their infancy. And when they outgrow the spaces we've carved for them in our sidewalks and begin to push up with their roots, we interpret this cry for help as a tripping hazard. And we send somebody with a chainsaw to cut them down, only to be replaced by another tree in its infancy, destined as well to be cut down in the same manner before it can push up that sidewalk and trip a jogger or set a skateboarder tumbling head over heels. My fascination, though, is with those trees that avoid the chainsaw, those old scarred city dwellers growing alongside us and among us. And I'm not alone in this fascination. There's an online group on Reddit devoted to sharing pictures of these specimens called Trees Sucking on Things. The implication being that they're able to ignore our frenetic and frantic human existence and playfully and casually taste their surroundings as if to learn about the world in the way that a child might. I believe Engulfed as a collection exemplifies the way that ideally we should be seeing each other as well. We need to look below the surface and recognize that parts of our past and parts of the things that we've struggled with are what forms who we are. And sometimes it's hard to get through that bark, that outer skin that may be rough and tough. But when we look deep inside, it's those struggles and those outside forces that truly shape who we are and make us more unique and more beautiful. In our modern society, we tend to see wood as a material, as a commodity to make other things out of, to build out of, instead of as part of a formerly living tree. Similarly to the way we see meat as an ingredient and as a food, rather than as part of a formerly living animal. And I'm as guilty of this as any woodworker, as any omnivore. Sometimes when walking with my dad, we'll both point at the same tree with particularly gnarly bark or a large burl and say to each other, wow, that would make a really sweet table. And the truth is, as much as I appreciate live edge furniture, and it probably is a beautiful piece of wood inside, trees are far more valuable while they're still standing. For years, every time I see one of these trees engulfing part of a fence or anything else, I've pointed it out to whoever I'm with. And thus my fascination with the phenomena has become an obsession. And grew until a number of years ago when I found an example where somebody had cut the tree on both sides of the fence, leaving it just hanging there by the wires, easily freed by a pair of bolt cutters. When I finally got the piece back to my workshop, the tree once again revealed its tenacity to me. The fence that it had engulfed had not weakened the wood, but rather given it an extra set of defenses against my machines. I've tried cutting these specimens with chainsaws, with routers, with sawzalls, which I assumed would work given the name sawzall. And none of these things were effective against this semi-natural composite material. I realized finally that it was going to dull whatever tool I tried to cut it with. So I had to meet the tenacity of the tree with a tenacious tool that I could just continually resharpen. And it wouldn't break, but rather dull, and I would resharpen it, and the cycle would continue. So the machine I ended up using for this project was mostly I did all the cutting on a milling machine with a fly cutter, a hardened steel tool that would dull, but I could just take it out, sharpen it, and replace it again. As perhaps I should have expected, these specimens, these Sawyer's nightmares, did indeed reveal their inner beauty. And ever since completing that first small piece, friends have been sending me photos of trees and fences or trees and buildings. And on a rare occasion, have alerted me to the opportunity to collect more specimens from where trees are being cut with bits of metal inside them. By now, the bead that Michael Glancy nailed to that tree decades ago has undoubtedly been fully engulfed by the flesh of that tree. bark acting as scar tissue, the grain parting on one side of that bead and rejoining itself on the other. Ultimately no more than a small nuisance in the life of that tree. But in a way, the unnatural seed to a decades-long exploration. And for this particular tree, frankly, I hope we never get to see the beauty of the grain inside it.